Hey everyone, in this chapter 14 video, we're going to discuss one of the market structures, this one being firms in competitive markets. I've talked several times about the assumptions we make in our problems we work within economics. One of the assumptions is what type of market are we operating in, whether the market is competitive, or if there is just one powerful firm, like in the case of a monopoly or a monopsony, or if there are a small number of powerful firms like in an oligopoly. In this video, we'll talk and focus about firms in competitive market structures, the assumptions that leads us to, and how that plays out for various curves and market behavior for the firms. So for firms within competitive markets, we have certain assumptions that have to be fulfilled for it to be considered a competitive market. For example, no single buyer or seller has market power. That means buyers and sellers are price takers. Products are largely the same in the market or homogeneous. And firms can freely enter or exit the market. Now, there are reasons why sometimes markets are not competitive and these conditions are not met. So, for example, sometimes it's difficult to freely enter or exit a market. Let's say there are high costs associated with entering a market. For example, telecom industry has high barriers to entry, so it's difficult for market pressure to equalize by a new firm entering the market to capture profit opportunity. Therefore, not all markets are competitive. So let's talk about the revenue and the behavior that is profit or revenue maximizing from a firm in a competitive marketplace. They will take the price from the market. That's because they don't exert pressure on the market price because they aren't the sole provider of a product. Therefore, they don't. If they sell five more of a product, it's not going to influence the price by moving us along the supply curve or shifting it to where it impacts the price. So total revenue is price times quantity they sell. Average revenue is that total revenue divided by quantity. Marginal revenue is the change in total revenue divided by the change in quantity. And the total revenue and the average revenue do not change as they sell a higher quantity of the good. You'll see with other market structures that as they change the quantity, the total or average revenue can actually change for all of the goods they sell. See average revenue and marginal revenue defined there. Let's go ahead and pause for the quick quiz. You can answer questions 1 and 2 and then come back. So question 1, a perfectly competitive firm is C, takes its price as given by the market conditions. Again, in later chapters, we'll talk more about how in non-competitive markets, that's not necessarily the case and the consequences of that. Question 2, when a perfectly competitive firm increases the quantity it produces and sells by 10%, its marginal revenue will stay the same and its total revenue rises by exactly 10%. Because as we said, TR and AR do not change. So if there's an opportunity for them to generate profits, how do they generate the most profits? What behavior do they exhibit? So if we look here, we can see how different variables change as the quantity increases, how much total revenue increases by, total cost, profit, or the difference between those two, marginal revenue, so change at the margin, marginal cost, then change in profit. One note, just in case anyone doesn't know, this little triangle here is delta, the Greek delta that's used in math. It's going to be representative of a change in, so that's why it's usually associated with marginal calculations. So this is a moment where we're shifting in the course from a focus for market level diagrams. So your supply and demand, where your downward sloping demand, upward sloping supply for the entire market. Now we're focused on firm level behavior, and our graphs are going to change a little bit. So this is something you really need to pay attention to. Talks right here about now we're moving beyond market level diagrams. So now you can see the marginal cost curve is what we would think of as the supply curve associated with cost. But then for this firm level diagram, we have a horizontal curve right here, quote unquote, at this price point that is equal to average revenue or marginal revenue. And that is going to be in place of our market level demand curve. For the firm, we have this line right here. That's because, as we said, the firm is a price taker. So its demand curve is right here at the market price, where average revenue equals marginal revenue. The firm can sell any quantity at once at that price, but it's perfectly elastic. It can't sell any quantity at a higher price. In the short run, the firm's supply curve corresponds to the portion of the marginal cost curve above its average variable cost. So you can see right here the average variable cost and the marginal cost right here. So from this point forward, the marginal cost curve is above its average variable cost. So the supply curve is essentially beginning here and extending through there. That's a little different than what we've seen for market level diagrams. For this part of the discussion, we're focused on the short term. I've mentioned before that in the long run, costs can change as new factories are spun up or shut down. I recommend bookmarking this, saving this off. You're going to want to look back at it several times. In fact, you should practice drawing this. You may even want to have hanging up. This is the market level diagram. This is the short run firm level in a competitive market. This is monopolist. This is monopolistic competition. This is oligopoly. And then see how those vary. But we'll go through those others in subsequent chapters. Remember before that I mentioned the efficient scale, and that's at the minimum of the average total cost curve, and that is going to be right there. So the profit maximizing quantity occurs where the marginal cost curve and the marginal revenue curve intersect at that market price. So right here is the Q optimum, the quantity that you want to produce to be profit maximizing. But note that's at a different point than where average total cost is at a minimum. So right here, you got where average total cost is at a minimum, but the profit maximizing quantity is actually here. So it may be surprising that the quantity we pick is where marginal cost equals marginal revenue rather than where we minimize average total cost. But really, we're squeezing every bit of profit out of the next unit until the next unit no longer provides us with profit. So that's why we're focused on marginal revenue and marginal cost. And where those equal, you've squeezed out the last drop of profit. And that's why it's the profit maximizing quantity. So at points to the right of here, say Q2, the marginal cost is greater than the marginal revenue, so you're going to take on a loss. But at points prior to that, you can decrease that difference until you get where they intersect and get all this additional value where marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. I've mentioned a little about how things change in the short run versus in the long run. That's because in the short run, as long as the variable costs are less than the total revenue, or if we flip that wording around, uh, we'll shut down if total revenue is less than variable cost. So in the short run, we'll shut down if the price is less than the average variable cost. That's because the fixed cost we can't do anything about in the short run. But as long as, for example, well, maybe you wouldn't start a business if your daily activities can't cover how much it would cost on average to operate it, including those fixed costs. But as long as, since you can't get out of a lease, on the 15th, it ends on the 30th, as long as on days 16 through 30, your daily costs, like your labor cost, your food cost, are less than the revenue you would make by being open, then you're going to remain open, and that helps minimize your losses in that case. However, in the long run, well, we'll get into that. But in the long run, you'll make different decisions as you can change those fixed costs. Going back to here real quick, I won't make you follow it all right now, but read through this and see how the inequalities are discussed and the different ways you can think about this, or think through, okay, in this situation, or if it's written this way, what does this mean, and what does that mean for the short run? Should I go ahead and continue or not? One thing to consider is sunk cost. This is important because even though you've already spent a certain amount in the past, that doesn't change whether your future actions will generate profit or not. So let's say you've spent $100, and if you can just spend $10 more, you'll earn $5. And I've already spent $100. Well, that doesn't matter. What matters is it would cost you $10 to earn $5. You don't want to do that. It doesn't matter what you spent in the past. What matters is the next amount you spend and the next revenue you will earn. So sunk costs are an important opportunity that can be counterintuitive for people that haven't studied business. And that is why I said earlier that the supply curve here for this farm level diagram starts at the marginal cost curve where it's above the average variable cost in the short run. If it's below that, we would shut down immediately. Also note that if we restricted ourselves to the quantity produced at the efficient scale, so where average total cost is minimized, which is right here, then in the short run we would lose out on the profits when the quantities fall from here to here, or rather from about here to here. In this case study, it goes into greater detail about the example I touched on. I recommend reading it to really hammer home that point. All right, now to contrast that with in the long run, whether we stay or whether we exit. Also, whether we exit now versus stay now and then exit later. So, as I said, that picture changes. We will exit when total revenue is less than total cost. So we're no longer looking at just the margin. We're looking at these total cost and total revenue. Therefore, in the long run, the firm's supply curve is the portion of the marginal cost curve that's above its average total cost curve, not the average variable cost like we discussed here. So now, since we're looking at the long run, we're looking at the average total cost curve, and saying the supply curve starts there, then in the long run, firms in a competitive market will operate at the efficient scale and generate quantities at that efficient scale. I recommend drawing these two curves next to each other, or these two diagrams next to each other, showing the short run, the supply curve is the MC above the AVC, and then for the long run, the supply curve is the MC beginning at the minimum of the ATC. and showing how they're different quantities, or the same on one graph, and show how the quantities are different. That'll help you hammer home the point here. So here we can quantify profit, profit being the price difference, or the difference between the price and the average total cost at that quantity. So it would be the area of this rectangle, base being the quantity, height being the difference between the price and the average total cost. If the price is below the average total cost, you can see what the loss would be. So this is something you're going to want to pay attention to and revisit multiple times. And then in later chapters, you'll probably want to revisit this to compare how this is different in a perfectly competitive firm versus in another firm in a different market structure, like a monopoly. So to find the profit maximizing quantity, you're going to find the quantity at which price equals marginal cost. Then if the price is lower than the average variable cost, you're going to shut down immediately and remain out of business. So that's the short run. Then if average variable cost, if the price is between average variable cost and average total cost, you'll operate in the short run, but exit in the long run. And then if the price is above average total cost, then you'll stay in business and profit. This goes through how you want to draw this. So looking back at my board here, you may be able to see, if I don't have it up, you can see, you're going to draw that. And I talk through here about how you'll want to draw it in the order. So first you'll draw an average total cost curve with a minimum, then an average variable cost curve below that, since it doesn't account for fixed cost. Then you'll have your upward sloping marginal cost curve, knowing that your supply curve will begin at a certain point, depending on whether it's in the short run or the long run. You'll draw the horizontal line at the price. Then you'll find the quantity associated with that. So dot down the line down to the x-axis to find your profit maximizing quantity. And then if at that quantity, the average total cost curve is below the price, we'll profit and stay in business because price is greater than our average total cost. But if the average variable cost is below the price, we shut down and we'll stay out of business. And then if it's in between, we'll continue in the short run, but exit in the long run, since in the long run we can change our fixed cost. Let's go ahead and pause for the quick quiz. Attempt questions 3, 4, and 5, then come back. All right, so for question 3, a competitive firm maximizes profit by choosing the quantity at which B, marginal cost equals the price. Because in a competitive firm, they're a price taker, and so the price represents the value of their good or the demand. So marginal or average revenue. Then question 4, a competitive firm's short run supply curve is its marginal cost curve and above its average variable cost curve. Again, that's for the short run. Question 5, if a profit maximizing competitive firm is producing a quantity at which marginal cost is between the average variable and average total cost, it will A, keep producing in the short run, but exit in the long run. So in our basic models here, and we're talking about a perfectly competitive market structure where you have free entry and exit. In these cases where a company is profiting, then other firms can enter that marketplace and increase supply, shift it right until the marginal revenue will equal marginal cost, and there will be no profits, no economic profits for the firm. So that may run counter to what you have heard about economics and capitalism prior to this class. Companies are striving for profits, etc. Well, in the basic economic models for capitalism, there would be no profits in the long run in a perfectly competitive marketplace. So this may run counter to what you already thought. Now is a good time to reevaluate what one thinks they know about economics and capitalism. But again, this is dependent on the assumption of a perfectly competitive market, which is homogeneous goods and free entry and exit and all those assumptions we talked about earlier. And we see that's not the case. So some of these assumptions must not be playing out in all situations. And maybe that's because goods are differentiated or there's higher barriers to entry. So there isn't free entry or exit in the market into a market. And there can be good reasons for that, but it's a assumption that you're going to have to challenge what you know about and what you think you know about all this. But if you're reading through this and it confuses you, that's probably why. I highly recommend reading through all of these slides and really creating it in your head how this plays out. An important thing to continuously remember is that we are focused on economic profit here, not accounting profit. And that's an important distinction here compared to your accounting classes. Changes in various factors like preferences, uh, those can factors can change sometimes before the supply changes, before new companies enter a market. Therefore, there can be short run or temporary profits that then get reduced back to zero. Things don't change instantaneously. Here we're going to show some different graphs showing in the long run what happens to the supply curve when you're producing at the efficient scale, and contrast that to what we've discussed so far with the upward sloping supply curve. So you can see here, A shows an initial market equilibrium here, as we've discussed, and then zero economic profit, where the marginal cost equals the average minimum of the average total cost. Then something has caused demand to shift and increase. Now that drives the price up above average total cost from P1 to P2. This generates this rectangle of profit here. But then the market responds in the long run, ramps up production, and we see another shift, not the demand this time, but now you've got supply. So we went from D1 to D2. Now we're going from S1 to S2. That brings the price back down from the P2 back to P1 and reduces the economic profits back down to zero. I highly recommend drawing this just to force yourself to go through the motions and build that muscle memory of how this all plays out. One thing to note here is that if a firm in a competitive market has some sort of competitive advantage and they can produce at a lower cost than the average industry cost, then they can earn some profits based on that advantage. Let's go ahead and pause for the quick quiz. Please attempt questions 6 through 8, then come back. All right, for question 6, in the long run equilibrium of a competitive market with identical firms, what are the relationships among price, marginal cost, marginal and average total cost? That's going to be D. Price is going to equal the marginal cost and the ATC because it specifies the long run specifically. Question 7. In the short run equilibrium of a competitive market with identical firms, if new firms are getting ready to enter, what are the relationships among price, marginal cost, and average total cost? So if new firms are getting ready to enter the market, that must mean there is profit. So price has to be above the average total cost, even if it's equal to the marginal cost. So that's going to be C. Question 8. Suppose pretzel stands in New York City are a perfectly competitive market in long run equilibrium. One day the city starts imposing a $100 per month tax on each stand. How does this policy affect the number of pretzels consumed in the short run and in the long run? So it's going to be C. no change in the short run where they can't change their fixed costs quickly, but it's going to be down in the long run due to this additional cost, what it does to the supply curve. So you're definitely going to want to pay attention to several things here. Try out graphing several of the graphs, build that muscle memory, and really think through why things play out the way they do. And you've got all the information here. So do some exercising and let me know if you have any questions.